Hello, and welcome to The Mastering Show. My name is Ian Shepherd. I'm a mastering engineer, and I run a website called Production Advice aimed at helping you get the best results recording, mixing, and mastering your music. And with me, as always, is my co-host, John Tidy from reaperblog.net. Hi, John. How you doing?
I just ate a whole pizza, and I'm ready to fall asleep. But first, we have a Q&A session.
And I literally was asleep till about 5 minutes ago, but it's okay. I have coffee. We will make it through this.
We'll survive.
Exactly. So yeah, another episode where we answer questions that you guys have left, either sent us by email or left in the comments on YouTube or maybe asked on social media, wherever we find them. John, what's the first question?
First question comes from Taylor. If you don't have a good audio monitoring system, could you use your spectrum analyzer to get a good frequency balance?
No. What's the next question? Sorry. Okay.
I feel like that is the short and concise answer. Like the meters can give us an indication of what's happening, but they don't tell us everything.
Yeah, exactly. It's, I certainly think frequency analyzers can be useful, especially when we're learning what we need to do. I mean, I had really basic, it was actually built into a consumer graphic equalizer when I first started training as a mastering engineer. So it had maybe, I think, 8 bands over the whole frequency range. But it was generally helpful for kind of keeping my ears in check, really, just making sure you weren't getting tired or just getting used to what you were listening to and fooling yourself. And these days, the plugins available have incredibly sophisticated analyzers on them, or you could get something like Span by Voxengo. There's a ton of either free or really affordable analyzers out there as well.
Yeah.
My problem is that the really detailed ones are too detailed. I feel like if I use Span as an example on the Home Mastering EQ video series, and just because it's free, so anybody can kind of get access to it and have a level playing field, if you like. And I recommend there that you change the settings to kind of broaden out the curve and to slow it down so that you don't get distracted by that detail.
Yeah, you kind of need some averaging. Like, there's so many factors with it. Like, there's no one setting that works for all kinds of audio that you're doing or working on. And different settings will be more accurate in the low end than the high end, for example. A lot of the analyzers use FFT, and from what I know about FFT, it needs a very long block size, buffer size for it to actually work in the low end, because the waveform is longer than the block size, and then it kind of has to guess what it actually is. So, yeah, low frequency accuracy in a meter is really tricky unless there's a lot of latency.
Yeah, and actually, you reminded me, we should put a link on the show notes at themasteringshow.com for people, because Dan Worrell, who's done a ton of great YouTube tutorial videos, did one recently on how he has Span set up, and he's got some settings in there that that do all of these things we're talking about. They kind of smooth things out and give you more resolution in the low end. But even then, I just feel, well, there are things that I pick out all the time with my ears that I wouldn't have noticed just looking at an analyzer. And correspondingly, there's things sometimes that I see on an analyzer that look scary, but actually sound absolutely fine. And it does depend on the material and the arrangement and all of those things. So, and I think that's why I said no as the initial answer to the question. It's because it's an invaluable tool to help you kind of understand what you're hearing and to learn what you're hearing and get clues as to where there may be potential problems, but it's not enough on its own. You also need to do all the other stuff of getting the best quality monitoring you can, or maybe getting a high quality pair of headphones and adding maybe some acoustic treatment to the room to help get things under control. All of those things are still going to be necessary, even if you have the best analyzer in the world.
Yeah, like when an EQ has the option of having the analyzer in the background, I usually like to have that. But I find it helps to like find the specific frequency, but you could definitely live without it. And if you have like a a lot of the fancy metering suites, it's almost like it's eye candy for the client, or like to, take a screenshot and share it on social media. Like, look, I'm working. But like, you don't really use them.
It's funny because I'm the same. Almost all of the EQs I use have some kind of analyzer. So I'm in the habit of having one of these things in front of me, and it kind of feels a bit weird if I try and use something that doesn't. But actually, for the first, I guess, 10 or 15 years that I was working, I didn't have that. I mean, I remember when one of the first ones that was available was a thing called the Penguin meter, which was a Windows thing only. It's still around somewhere. And yeah, I remember seeing this thing with this incredible detail and resolution and real-time FFT. And I considered at the time buying a PC specifically to run this thing, because the machine that I had, the Sadie system that I was running on, I mean, I couldn't route the audio out and back in real time, but also it just wouldn't have been able to cope with running this thing as well as the audio software. Whereas now we take them for granted. So, and I think maybe there's some advantage in that, So to go, I mean, it is helpful to have one of these things to help train your ears, but it's also helpful to not have one and to have to learn to just listen, and to do what everybody else does, which is go for a narrow cue and boost it up and sweep around and find the problem frequency and pull it back and rock it backwards and forwards to figure out if you're in exactly the right place. And I still do that now. I mean, one of the nice things about some of the EQs that are around these days, like the FabFilter Pro Q, is that you can solo the frequency band of the frequency that you're working on and hear and fine tune the frequency like that. But you can also see it. And it often interests me, especially in the low end, that quite often it will look to me as though the frequency is in one place, but what I eventually settle on by ear is a little bit different than that somehow. It's kind of a great way to get in the right ballpark, but then it all comes down to how it sounds. So yeah, analyzers are great. We're very lucky to have these toys available to us, but you still need your ears.
The next question comes from Kos. Are small foam speaker platforms enough to raise the speakers off of a desk, or do you recommend something higher or made of different material? So right now I'm using cinder blocks, like concrete blocks on my desk. And then I've got my monitors on the little sort of rubber pads that the Focals come with. But in the past, I've used foam blocks. I've used like not foam like acoustic foam, but like I don't know what the material is.
The really dense kind of rubbery stuff.
Yeah, more dense foam. Yeah, that's not. It squishes, but it's not like soft. I've also used like cork pads, like pot holder sort of things, trivets, because you call it chunks of cork. And I've also used the dense acoustic panel material, rock board, I think it's called, stuff that you'd have to like cut to shape. And all of those worked about the same, I would say. So, but I do prefer the sound of something under the speakers. I know Ethan Weiner has done a video like proving that they don't do anything. But I feel like anytime I've done it, it's always been better to have that.
Yeah, I would hesitate to say that Ethan has proved it. He's done a video where he wasn't able to measure any sensible differences. The idea is that you want to decouple the speakers from the desk. Lots of people have the speakers sitting on the same work surface that the DAW is sitting on, or at any rate, a large kind of table,
a large flat,
a large flat area. That's right. And the idea is that, I guess even a shelf that's hung from a paneled wall. And the idea is that because almost all frequencies have some kind of resonant frequency, if the speakers get whatever they're sitting on vibrating in sympathy, resonating at that frequency, that's going to color the sound.
But also the reflection, just having a large flat surface makes a big difference. Like when you're playing music out of your phone, if you put that on a table, it gets louder, and the sound drastically changes in EQ. So the same thing is happening with your studio monitors when they're flat on a table.
Well, it certainly can do, yeah, if they're, depending on the angles. The quick test to whether that's happening is to just like the mirror test on the wall, where you're finding the right place to put acoustic panels, you can move a mirror around on the surfaces in between you. And if you can see the speakers in the mirror at any point, then you're going to be getting some kind of reflection from that surface. And that could be coloring the sound.
The other thing is that your tweeters need to be at ear level.
That was the thing that Ethan pointed out that I think definitely is valid, which is that lots of people will test these things by listening to how things sound, getting a product, whatever it is, putting it on the speakers, which will change the height of the speakers in relation to their ear level, and then listening again. And that's not a valid comparison. If you want to do that kind of with and without, you need to find something else to go underneath the speakers so that the speakers stay at the same height. Because there will be noticeable changes just from moving the speakers those few centimeters or a couple of inches or whatever it is, whether or not the product is actually doing a useful job decoupling them from anything. His idea is basically that that's what's happening to everybody when they try these products and hear a huge improvement, and that actually there's no real benefit. So on the counter side of that, you have Bob Katz talking about having custom decoupling devices built for his, he's got massive Dynaudio speakers these days, and he's talking about really low resonant frequency. I think the speakers sit on a concrete floor anyway, but he's still interested in decoupling them. He's done measurements where he has compensated for the height, because the other thing that Ethan says is that even a few sort of other movements in the speakers, they have to be in exactly the same place as well as everything else, and the mic has to be in exactly the same place when you make the measurements. And he's, it's his main argument when he talks about acoustic treatment in rooms as well, is that when you move your head, you hear bigger changes in the sound just because of the room nodes and where you are and how they color the sound in the room. I think all of the points that he makes are valid. On the other hand, Bob says that he's made measurements that has shown a noticeable difference in terms of the frequency response, which is what Ethan didn't find. So I would say in terms of proof, it's kind of not settled yet. I don't have anything sort of decoupling my speakers, but that's because they're sitting on a concrete floor and I've used some bricks, a bit like you, to lift up the height somewhat. I think the big thing for most people is to say that most speakers do need to be at ear level. Now, having said that, mine aren't, but I know from experience that they have a very wide high frequency dispersion. So, kind of if I scrunch down in my seat and lower my head by 6 inches or whatever it is, that doesn't have any noticeable difference on the high end that I hear. Whereas lots of speakers will kind of beam the high end in a very narrow area directly in front of the tweeter. And if that's not kind of pointing straight at your ears, you're basically off axis, and that's gonna change the way the speakers sound. So I would
say that if that's something you're looking at as a way to improve the sound of your speakers, you're better off getting speaker stands, so they're off the table completely. Speaker stands made a massive difference in the sound quality of my speakers. Then acoustic treatment was like triple that improvement, and the decoupling or putting some foam between the speaker and the stand was, I don't know, 1% or a much smaller amount. So
yeah, I would
spending like I think it's $60 for like a basic pair of floor standing speaker stands. Those will let you get your speakers in the right space, in the right angles and all that. And it just makes a massive difference.
That was going to be my point. I mean, because lots of people buy kind of custom consoles that are designed to have a computer monitor and a keyboard and some gear in racks, and then the monitors mounted as well. I don't necessarily think that's a bad idea, but I see a lot of photos of studios where, for me, the speakers are too close.
Too narrow and too close to...
Too narrow, too close to the listening position, and also, as a result, too close to the wall. Because, it's natural for people to put these desks up by the side of the wall. I mean, there's a video on my channel somewhere of how I set up my little room at home. And I've said often it's not a proper mastering studio, but it follows good principles. And so I'm sitting here about 1/3 of the room length away from the wall in front of me. And I spent a lot of time fiddling around with the speakers to get them in the right place. And the problem with one of these desks is that it just doesn't give you enough flexibility. It's like the monitors go there, whether or not that sounds any good. You can't move them back 6 inches because they'll fall off, and you can't move them 6 inches forward because they'll fall off the other side. So yeah, I definitely agree. If you're not kind of convinced by the way that things are sounding, and that's the kind of setup that you have, I mean, even if it's not a custom-made desk and it's just they have to be where they are because of some physical restriction in the room, yeah, getting a pair of speaker stands so that you can adjust the height, adjust the position, and move the speakers around independently of the mixing position, and then put the mixing position also where it works best, that's going to, make a huge difference. And then you need the acoustics treatment, like you say. And then probably I think the difference of the pads is not going to be that significant, because the other thing that Ethan said, I mean, Bob's measurements in his studio are probably several orders of magnitude more precise and more sensitive than it will be for any of us. Ethan was making the point that even if it's a really rubbishy kind of desk that the speakers are sitting on, it doesn't really resonate significantly. If the speakers are fairly heavy, the amount that they're going to move and the amount of bass, for example, they're going to transmit into the table is probably pretty minimal. And like you said, you've also got this issue of reflections. But one advantage of those consoles is that by having the speakers up and fairly close to you, it's very unlikely you'll get any reflections off the desk that are interfering with the sound. So that's a benefit, but you can achieve the same thing in other ways.
Yeah.
If you feel there's something going on and you've ruled out these other things that we're talking about and you want to try some kind of isolation system, I know lots of people who use it and swear by it. I've never tested it. I've never been bothered by it. But if it seems to work, they're not that expensive. I don't think there's any harm. But yeah, I think it's definitely the kind of the last few percent kind of adjustment, like you say, rather than a game changer.
Next question comes from Kim. I always mastered at minus 0.1 dB ceiling. Is it wrong these days? We also had a question from Spartan on YouTube with a long but similar theme to his question.
Yeah, Spartan was frustrated, wasn't he?
Yeah.
I think both of these questions were prompted by the news fairly recently that Spotify now have some recommendations for the maximum peak level of music when you upload it to get the best results from encoding with their codec. For louder material, they're recommending -2 as a maximum peak level, whereas most people are kind of just getting used to the idea that maybe -1 was better than 0 or -0.1 or -0.3 or whatever we've kind of been working to for ages. And yeah, he was frustrated by all of this chopping and changing, which is understandable.
Yeah. I think when I first started to talk to you years ago, when was that, like 2007? Probably.
Yep, thereabouts.
I think I was starting to do minus 0.7. And then probably in the last 2 years, -1 is where my ceiling's at. I don't see the point in going above that. I think the intersample peak distortion, or just the idea that the MP3 is going to sound worse, like with clipping, not just the data compression, is the main thing that keeps me from going above.
Yeah, so I changed to -1. I guess when the EBU, the loudness units recommendations first came out, the broadcast standards, and also around the time that Mastered for iTunes, the guidelines for that were released. And both of those picked -1. That was kind of the first time that it hit my radar that there might be a problem with being any higher. Up until then, I'd been kind of -0.3, I think. And yeah, the general problem with all of them is that there are situations where the audio will, either because of processing or encoding or just from playback from a digital to analog converter, will come out with levels that are over where you would expect them for 0 dB full scale. And that could cause extra clipping. But I mean, I've made these changes and I make these recommendations. I'm not convinced that it will make an audible difference for the way that I'm working, because I recommend working at relatively conservative loudness levels. And even if I go back and check loud projects that I mastered years before I became aware of these kind of issues with the maximum peak level, when I analyze them, I'm seeing the occasional intersample peak of like plus half a dB or something. And I think there's a big difference between the occasional extra intersample peak and, the kind of massive overshoots of like +3 that you can get if something has been mastered super loud right up to 0 dB. I think that's a situation where you definitely do run the risk of extra damage to the audio file. If the loudness levels are reasonably conservative to begin with, it's probably not the end of the world. So, I mean, Kim, I don't know that minus 0.1 is wrong. One approach that people take is that they master up to 0 for digital releases like CD, where the audio is going to be lossless, and then they just reduce the overall gain by a dB if it's going to go to a format where it's going to be data compressed, so iTunes or one of the other online streaming services. That will probably help and minimize the risk. I mean, but I think it's important to say that minus 0.1 is not necessarily enough. It's a good rule of thumb, and if your loudness levels are conservative, then you'll probably be fine with it. That's my personal experience. But especially if you want to push the loudness harder, I mean, this is the kind of the ironic thing is, I mean, Spotify's guidelines say -1 is fine if the loudness of your music is below, I think, -14 LUFS. But if you're pushing it louder than that, then it should be -2. So it's almost like the louder you push it, the more peak headroom you need and the less room, again, you've got to play with. So it's another great reason for not mastering too loud. But I can appreciate why Spartan and other people are frustrated by this, because it seems like the ballpark is constantly moving. But I do think I agree with you. I don't see that there's any point in pushing it higher and running the risk that something is going to go wrong, especially not with the world as it is, where normalization is becoming more and more common. And so the kind of the need to be super loud in the first place is reducing.
The next question comes from Bruce. In episode 57, what Ian didn't address is how to handle the mastering when songs overlap on the album, as in one song starts while the previous track is still fading out.
Let's say you maybe have sound effects blending between two tracks, or you have a long fade out and then the next song kind of grows out of the fade of the previous track, or something cuts in before the reverb of the previous song ends. At that point, you have an ID flag for the beginning of the song, somewhere in between those, which works fine. I mean, it sounds a bit weird when you skip to it directly, but he wants to know what you do, what I do when I'm exporting those files individually. And the answer is I personally don't change anything unless the client specifically requests it.
I would be the same way, I think. Like, keep it the same as the album unless you're releasing that song as a single. And then maybe master it 2 ways, or just change the intro first 3 seconds of it a different way. I mean,
one of the reason behind that, one of them is just practical, which is that, most aggregators, TuneCore, CD Baby, all the rest of them, won't let you submit multiple files to different services to begin with. So lots of people, just on the loudness topic, talking about, should you do a quieter file for streaming or different files for different platforms? You've got a real challenge actually trying to get different versions onto the different platforms unless you upload them all separately yourself. But what that also means is you basically have one version of a song. And if you, for example, if you did a version where you left the tail out of a song with a slow fade and you didn't have the next song coming in where it did on the album, when somebody chose to listen to that as if it was an album, the gaps wouldn't work, right? That you'd have no way of getting back to the spacing that you wanted for a continuous listening experience. I guess if there's no situation where you would imagine people listening to all of the songs in sequence, then that perhaps doesn't matter. But basically, you kind of have to keep it the way that it is. And that's my reason for doing it, is I like mastering songs to be listened to in a sequence. I like structuring something as an album and even sending the client a DDP production master as if they were going to have a CD made, even if they're not going to. Partly because all of the metadata can be included, but also because the gaps can be worked out like that and can be kept precise. So yeah, when they ask for files that are going to be uploaded, I just export them exactly as they would be on the CD, which does mean you have a hard start and end. You know, if you're listening to the song in shuffle, then the end of the slow fade will get chopped off. And if the beginning kind of blends in from somewhere else, it'll have a sharp beginning, which is a shame, but it's kind of, there's almost no two ways around it. Like you say, if there's going to be a single release, perhaps a standalone version of the song, then you could do a different edit.
Yeah. It has a clean intro or a clean outro sort of thing.
Yeah, that's right. And that's kind of always been the way. I mean, I remember, I don't know, well, if you think of Another Brick in the Wall by Pink Floyd on the album, that blends in, I think, at the start and the end. But obviously it was released as a single, so they had a different version for the vinyl single cut. And yeah.
Or whatever went to the radio.
Exactly.
Or video or whatever it is, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's another situation. If you've got different formats, maybe you can have...
I think the videos often have different masters.
Videos often do. They sometimes have sound effects added, for example. And at the point where, well, I was going to say where vinyl was more common, but of course it's coming back these days. But there have been times where I've done masters where on the CD, it plays continuously through from what would be side A and side B on the vinyl. Whereas on the vinyl, you obviously have to fade in and out somehow. So I mean, there are kind of times when you can tweak it, but yeah, for individual songs on an album on a song by song basis, it's not really realistic to do it any differently. So if that's a concern of the artist, really the best you can do is to have some point where the signal between the two is very, very quiet and you're unlikely to notice things cut in and out, or just live with the hard start and end.
We have a bunch of questions from Steve. How much free time should you give to a potential client before you leave them to their own devices or ask for payments? What if a client refuses to pay after the master has been handed over, yet still uses the master? Should we ask for our fee up front or after the work has been completed? How about charging a deposit? Can that work without putting off potential clients? How do we prove that an unpaid master used for an end product is our master?
So we were talking about this before we started recording, and reading between the lines, we think Steve has been messed around by a client or two. You know, he's basically asking how do we handle payment? Probably I can summarize the way that I work by saying that I always ask for payment up front. So I ask for 100% payment in advance. That's a kind of reaction to... So for 15 years, I worked for a company and I didn't have to deal with this stuff. They used to charge 50% in advance and 50% on completion, which is a pretty standard way of working. That kind of covers you. You know, hopefully the 50% payment would be enough that if you get to a certain point in the project and the client bails on you, it's not a complete loss, but it's not so much money that they're deterred. I think maybe 2 or 3 years after I'd been working freelance, I had one client where it took me 8 months to get the payment. That's when I changed my policy and asked for full payment up front. Now, I know for a fact that put some people off, but I'm okay with that because it basically rules out a whole ton of clients who might be problem clients. I mean, I have a complete money back guarantee and I've said before, I always like to master the first song, send that to the client, get feedback, and we kind of figure out between us how it's going to sound. And that's always been enough kind of time and information to figure out if there's a project where I'm maybe not a good fit. In fact, now I say it, I don't think it's ever happened. But that's reassuring for the client. So at that point, they know that if things don't work out the way they hoped, you know, for whatever reason, I will refund them. And I haven't done too much work at that point, so there's not too much risk on my part. I think asking for 100% in advance is probably sort of the extreme other end of the scale. But kind of to answer Bruce's questions, personally, I think it's a benefit to have a deposit because it rules out people who might be not even thinking about pulling a fast one, if you like. There is the risk that it will put other people who are completely honest and upfront, just put them off, you know, because they're concerned that maybe you won't be honest, that you would refund their money if they weren't happy or whatever. I think most people who are asking, especially these days, for mastering as a service, understand that there's going to be a price to pay, and providing they know what that price is in advance, they can make a decision about it. And that kind of basically covers all of those questions that Steve is asking about. What do you think, John?
I do a very similar thing. So 50% for an album project when I receive the files to begin work, and the rest after revisions and everything is approved. I don't charge a deposit if I'm just doing a single. I'll just do the work, and they get an MP3 to check, and then full payment before the WAV files. I don't think that puts people off charging a deposit. I think that's pretty standard for any sort of creative work.
I mean, we paid our builder up front recently when we had some work done. I think it's kind of reasonable in any situation where you're providing a service. In our case, it's probably mainly time that we have to invest in doing the project. But, sometimes there are materials. I mean, there could be if you're, buying analog tape, or you need to hire some mics for a recording session or whatever that might be. So I think that's, completely reasonable. It's interesting you saying about supplying an MP3, because that's, I guess, one way in which you have a little bit of security, in the sense that if the client suddenly decided they didn't want to pay, I would not regard an MP3 as usable for a master. I can imagine there might be people out there who would think, the MP3 is fine.
I mean, there's a lot of situations where that's all they want. All they want is an MP3, and you're just giving it to them for free. I trust that most people are not trying to screw me over. If that is the case, it's only been a couple hours of work at the most. Probably spent longer on the emails back and forth before the project started than the actual mastering process, or, tracking them down for money later. At the end of the day, like a week later, I'm not going to remember it. So I don't care that much.
That's a good point. And I mean, another thing you could do is simple stuff like, like when I did demos for people, I don't do demos anymore, but when I was still able to do them, when I still had the time, you could just fade the song out 10, 20 seconds early, so that they get to hear everything about how it's going to sound, but they don't have the final version available to them. I mean, the one thing we haven't answered out of all of that is Steve's question about if this happens to you, if somebody uses a master that they haven't paid for, how can we prove that they have? That's difficult if they make any changes, but if they literally use the file exactly as is, you should be able to do a null test, which is something that we've talked about before, but very briefly, you get both copies of the song. You get your master and a copy from the file that you think that they've used the master for. Line them up so that they're time aligned down to the last sample in your DAW, and then invert the polarity of both channels of one of the files. When you play those back, therefore, the waveforms are effectively going in opposite directions and should cancel out completely. So if they're identical, then you'll hear complete silence. That's going to work.
If there's an EQ change, you're going to hear, it won't be complete cancellation. If there's a conversion to like MP3 or AAC or something like that for a video, then it's going to be just the artifacts of that process, but it should be, 99% null.
Yeah, I mean, that's where you get into the kind of the slightly gray area, and that's difficult to describe. My advice, if you are in any doubt, is to experiment. So get two files that you know are identical, and try adding small EQ changes here and there, or literally MP3 encode one of them and bring it back in and listen to the difference that's there. That's when it, if you're looking for a hard proof, if you can get a perfect null, because the other thing they might have done is change the level, but you can always tweak the level of one of the files to improve the amount of cancellation that you're getting. If you can literally get a perfect null, then you've got a great case. Still doesn't mean if they're the kind of person who hasn't paid you that's going to, hold up in any way, but at least you can kind of, if they're saying, no, it's not the same, you can say, yes, they are. Look, I did this. And you could do a screen capture video or whatever to kind of, and that might embarrass them into kind of, doing the right thing. If there's other kinds of differences, particularly EQ differences. It's hard to distinguish sometimes between an EQ difference and a mix difference. So then it's tougher. So it is a difficult situation. And I think the best advice, Steve, is to avoid all of this possibility by getting some kind of payment up front so that you feel comfortable that even if somebody does the wrong thing, you're not going to be too much out of pocket. That's the best solution.
Next question comes from Unfa. I've heard an opinion from a mixing engineer that dynamic masters might not work so well on PA systems. Results in venues might be worse than if one would go for a very compressed master instead. I'd love to know your opinion on this.
Yeah, somebody has been making this point to me quite forcefully on social media in the last week or so. The examples that I have been put forward were for EDM. And what I heard when I listened to these examples was very tight, very controlled bass, actually to the point where I felt like the masters were bass light. And as an experiment, I went in and added some extra bass down in the kind of 50, 60 hertz region until I felt they were better balanced EQ-wise. And at that point, when I listened to them, they sounded pretty good. But because I had added this EQ boost, they were clipping. So then I reduced the levels down to prevent the clipping. And lo and behold, the mastering level at that point was back where, in the kind of region that I would have put it if I'd been mastering the songs myself. And my interpretation of that is that, okay, so this person has achieved a higher loudness than I would normally recommend by reducing the amount of bass, because the bass is usually the thing that's hardest to control without a big negative impact on the sound. It's, the sound, it's either going to pump or it's going to distort, whatever the side effect might be. And so I made this comment to the person who was telling me that the PA was going to, these masters were going to sound better on a PA. And I think the idea is that lots of PA systems have half a room full of subwoofers, basically. You've got this extra bass coming out of there. So that actually, if you put what I would consider to be a balanced EQ through them, it would sound over the top. And actually, I can't say that that's not true. It's certainly possible. I hear sound systems in cars where the bass is insane, in my opinion. It sounds completely unbalanced, but the people who own the cars obviously love it. But what I can say is that there's no way in the world that all of those PA systems out there, all of those club systems, all the rest of it, have the same EQ boost. So let's say, for example, I have a master where, as far as I'm concerned, it's 4 dBs light with a kind of a gentle parametric shape at 50 hertz, right? And then it's been pushed really loud. If you play that back on a PA system that effectively adds 4 dBs at 50 hertz with a nice gentle parametric shape, it's going to sound fantastic, in my opinion. But if you play it back on a PA that has only got a 2 dB boost, it's going to sound a bit bass light. And if you play it back on a PA that's got a 6 or an 8 dB boost, it's still going to sound over the top. I mean, this is a general problem with mastering. We master things so that they sound great to us in the studio, but then they go out into the world and we have no control over the system they're played back on. But the whole concept of translation in mastering, for me, is that you get it to sound as good as you can on a system that is as balanced as possible. And then whatever happens to it out in the real world is what people expect. If people go to a club where there's a 10 dB boost in the sub bass, everything is going to get played back through that system. Everything they hear is going to be colored in that way. So things are going to sound as they would expect.
I think we've been talking about bass more than dynamics.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about bass more than dynamics because the idea of the person that I was talking to was that if you have less bass in the master, you can push I'm always saying about EDM that it doesn't need to be as loud as it is. People keep telling me that it's part of the sound, and I certainly think that slammed, heavily limited sound is something that has become part of the genre. But my argument is always that you could achieve that in the mix, then give yourself a few more dBs to play with, and you could use those few dBs creatively. I don't feel that you don't have to have the raw level that loud to achieve the sound. The sound is to do with the processing, not the level. And that if all of these things were mastered a little bit quieter, they could have their cake and eat it. In the sense that you could have the slammed sound and then you could, do other stuff. And it might not be the drums or the bass or whatever it is where you've got that characteristic over-limited sound, but maybe it's the synth drop, or it's to do with the percussion or the effects or whatever. So yeah, I mean, I'm kind of talking about the bass because I mean that the argument worked, right? If you master with less bass, then you can push the loudness higher with less risk of damage. But I still don't see that that's better. It's just different.
It doesn't really make sense to me because the big, powerful PA system is going to have more headroom than our wimpy home stereos. So a dynamic master should work better.
Yeah, I mean, so some of the most dynamic music I've heard has been at live gigs. And, on top of that, you've got the room that the PA goes into. I mean, if it's a club PA, you would hope that it's set up to sound good on the widest possible range of material. But if it's a touring PA, every night it goes into a different room and gets EQ'd differently to kind of adjust for the variations.
Yeah, I would say it gets calibrated every day, so it should be pretty good.
Yeah, if absolutely. If the engineer is any good, and I mean, it depends what the engineer is using as a reference. But again, this is something we don't have any control over.
It's always Steely Dan. It's always Steely Dan.
I don't think it's Steely Dan at an EDM gig. And the other thing is that, okay, if you're that focused on how something's going to sound on a PA, then maybe that should influence your decisions. But that then means that anybody listening in any other situation is effectively not getting an optimal result. Like for me, listening to these examples, I just felt, they sound pretty good, but I would want more weight in the low end, I'd want more, and I guess I could crank up the bass control on my amp, but that's never going to be perfect.
They have limiters in hardware and software for consoles as well.
Well, this is the other thing, do
that in the PA.
There's loudness matching software built into the PA, into the DJ software, into Serato and Traktor and all the others. DJs will have to balance the levels to a certain extent themselves because, even with all of some of this stuff is up at -4 LUFS, some of it's at -6, and some of it's only -8. So you've got a variation there anyway. Maybe the DJ builds that in and uses that as part of the ebb and the flow of the set. But I think most of them just kind of tweak the final levels a little bit. I just remember, 15, 20 years ago, we would scour the record shops looking for the white label releases of club tunes, specific, literally maybe only 10 copies were pressed of a particular tune for DJs to use in a set. And they would have extra, whatever it was, minute or two of beat at the beginning or end so that they could be mixed and that they could get really creative with the blending of the tracks. I feel like if somebody's focus is that kind of laser sharp on how it's going to sound in a club or in a PA, maybe you do a separate version specifically for that purpose, and then a more balanced overall master for everybody else who just listens on, an iPod or in the car or a radio or wherever it is. And that is just my opinion. And everybody knows my opinions about loudness. So I could be using my general opinion about loudness as an excuse to kind of say, no, the club argument doesn't make sense. But yeah.
I've never seen a video on it from inside of a club demonstrating it. So if that exists, please show me.
Yeah. I just don't believe that what's out there in clubland in terms of the PA systems is consistent enough that it makes any sense. You could tune something perfectly for a particular PA in a particular venue, but as soon as you move it anywhere else, all bets are off. And actually that I know from experience. I mean, I started off working in live sound in the universities when I was a student, and we would put up and tear down a PA every night. And it had to be separately EQ'd every time, even though it was in the same room, because it depended on the material and it depended on the crowd and all the rest of it. Even after you'd done your sound check, you would tweak it during the gig to try and get the results better. So when something is that variable, I just don't see that it makes any sense to try and optimize for it.
right, so that's all the questions.
Cool. Well, I mean, hopefully people found something interesting or useful in there amongst all of the rambling. I mean, thanks to everybody for sending in questions. We love getting them. We can't always reply, but we do try and read them all. And we make notes of the ones that come up most often or that we think are particularly interesting for Q&As or even future episodes. So by all means, keep sending them in. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you, John, for collecting the questions we answered this evening and for mixing and editing the show as always.
Yep, my pleasure.
Thanks to Kaylee Law for letting us use his music. And thanks for listening.